and this brings up an aspect of how we create the change and how we deliver the final outcomes is that user, both for the employee and for the customer, that user experience really starts to matter, right? Whether it's work from home or it's different measures of productivity or it's different value propositions. It's not just adding modernization is not just about upgrading the technology, right? It's about meeting a changing set of capabilities, the loss of institutional knowledge, changing needs
Yeah.
in both the employees as well. And so, modernization without thinking through that user experience becomes a big risk. I once saw an organization spend millions of dollars on installing new technology. What would happen is an order would come into the system. The planner would end up printing the page that shows the order. They'd photocopy it. They'd end up handwriting something on it. They'd go search some partial inventory that's outside the system. Then they'd write something else on it. Then they'd hand it to someone. And it actually, for that person, it was actually a worse process than what they had before. And so going all the way back to when we talked about direct observation, to understanding the needs of the employees as well as the customers becomes a pretty big deal in making sure the change is effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an effort to get folks to think about that, right? To have that person who knows the process to think about the future and say, how would you do it different, as opposed to how would you do it with new technology the same way? There's a lot of effort involved there, and I think it takes some definite change management efforts and repeated efforts.
Yeah, do you have experiences where we've designed ineffectively for the final outcome, and so whether it's lack of testing or the lack of the right user engagement, we end up designing ineffective solutions?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we've seen is just not including as much perspective of the customers, or at least having outsized perspective of customers. So in some organizations, in some public sector organizations, you have intermediaries. And if you start to look at those intermediaries in terms of how they interact, some of them might have an outsized voice as opposed to others. So I think there have been situations where we've found that we're creating a process based on that. So based on key stakeholder groups, but in terms of the individual citizen, maybe not considering that as much. So there are examples. I think that we focus on trying to catch those within the implementation itself. And one of the things that we've seen is that within these implementations, they're often very, very rapid. They have a tight timeline. They're obviously very high dollar. And if you haven't spent time before you start to think about the future and involve stakeholders and customers and think about out of the box how you're going to operate, there's really not a lot of time from when a system is being designed, coded, or designed and configured. So I have seen situations where that process reflection, if you will, it tries to be done in that short time frame, and there really isn't time. So you really end up with a trade-off of minor improvements that don't get found until you're in testing, which is definitely not where you want to find them, because then you have change orders and rework. So definitely have seen some things like that happen. We try to avoid that as much as possible. Sometimes we get brought in late, but that happens.
Yep.